right. Hello, everyone out there from the Sales Div Squad community. It's your host, Mateo Elvira, back with another episode. We got a super special guest for you today, Mr. Michael Tuso, who's currently the Director of Revenue Performance over at ChiliPiper. He's worked at a ton of other SaaS companies here in Los Angeles, including 2020 and Snack Nation. He's also a chapter officer for AAISP. I'm super excited to have him on the podcast here. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael.
Yeah, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Mike, I know that we actually spoke to one of your colleagues, Nate Branscombe, earlier on the podcast around, obviously the AE side of things, but super excited to have you on the podcast. I know that you were perhaps one of the very first employees at ChiliPiper when the team was starting to be built out and transitioned to a couple of roles. So excited to dive a little bit deeper into that. But I guess for those who haven't really heard of you or not too sure of what you're up to over at ChiliPiper, do you mind filling me in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I went back in our onboarding systems, and I found out that I was the fifth full-time
Wow.
employee. So we had a number of other contractors. My original number was 9, but I went back and looked, and I was the fifth full-time employee at ChiliPiper. And I was the first sales leader at ChiliPiper. The CEO and myself would split the duties here, working with the SDRs, the AEs, and the account manager. So I'm responsible for training and coaching everyone in customer-facing roles. When I first started out the team, he really wanted me to be in charge of the enablement and the SDR program and building that out. Since then, my roles have expanded quite significantly. I do a lot of stuff in marketing now too, like fun projects in this sales tech space. So I was actually a customer of ChiliPiper. I was one of the first larger deals. Previously, I worked as an SDR manager, purchased the tool as a part of my previous role as an SDR manager, and rolled it out to over 60 sales reps, cultivated a relationship with the CEO, and then gradually over time, it made sense to kind of make the move and build. The one thing I had never done in my career is build a team from scratch. So it was always nagging at me, take that risk, especially I'm, fairly young, was still in my 20s at the time, and thought that I would, build something from scratch. And I've been so very fortunate about the people that we've brought on, and what we've been able to build. This month is my second year, or 2 full years at ChiliPiper is this February. So I'm really
Congrats, man.
excited about that. Thank you.
That's awesome. I guess so you were first introduced to ChiliPiper when you were at Snack Nation in sales management there?
Yeah, so I was evaluating a couple of other tools. I even met with CEOs of other companies and getting very granular about what specifically I needed. And one day our sales ops person urged me to look. I kind of took a look at the website, and then later on down the road, he more seriously encouraged me to look. At that point, I went through a full sales process with my now boss and CEO of the company, Nicholas Vandenberg. And I occasionally would give him advice about his own company once I became a customer. When we implemented ChiliPiper, we saw a 30% increase in revenues immediately, and then sustained over time. And that kind of piqued my interest. And I got really excited about the tool itself. And then on the side, I get really excited about sales technology. And then I also get very excited about professional and personal development of other people. That's always my focus whenever I join a company, whether it's process related, of scaling teams and organizations that way. But also the thing is creating customized coaching plans for people and driving revenues on teams. So all these things were sort of coming together. And one day Nicholas was like, why don't you just come work here? So it made a lot of sense. And so that's what I've been working on ever since I joined.
Nice. So it kind of seems like the stars aligned perfectly for you around that time.
Yeah, absolutely. He has some family in LA and visits there really frequently, and I was living there at the time. So the stars did, just sort of aligned, and I made the jump rather quickly.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm super familiar with the tool. I love it. I don't know how I could do my job without it. We actually use it over at Go Guardian. That's something that I really push for them to get. And we've seen a tremendous uptick in meetings booked and just more efficiency around the meeting booking process. So definitely love what you guys are up to. But I'm curious, Mike, like going back to that time when you were, right about to join the team over at ChiliPiper, like what kind of stood out to you, or what did you see? What did you kind of like see in ChiliPiper that was so valuable and just like that really drew you to joining, I guess, like a startup at the time, what it really was? And I guess would love to hear like how you kind of found out about it.
Yeah, so I had other offers on the table at the time that I sort of notioned to Nicholas that I was sort of looking for something new. And what ultimately made me choose ChiliPiper over status quo or choosing other companies was the fact that like I really believed in the leadership team, and I felt it in my bones that I could like scale the sales team because I knew the product. I also really knew the market as someone who purchased tools really frequently. And I knew the pitfalls in the market in the sales tech space. I have a lot of like sales leaders I've worked with in the past and hundreds of sales reps that I've trained. So I knew that if I had like questions, I would have a network that I would be able to leverage and have leveraged really significantly since joining. So there were a lot of things that kind of, I think, what made me feel that way. But the biggest thing for me was like, I believed in the leadership team. I believed in the product. And then I just knew in my bones, I was like, I can totally scale this. And so I just sort of, it felt like taking a leap of faith, and it quickly paid dividends. Shortly after that, I was teaching myself how to like be an SDR all over again. I'm a big fan of like, when you join another company, even if you know a lot about sales development or sales in general, I think it's like not only humbling to go back into the role, but it's really important to kind of figure out all over again how a new product and a new market will work. And I think that's part of the excitement. I was like, whoa, I feel like I'm an SDR all over again. And it was really cool for me because I did prospecting myself. I like made all the mistakes that like people have made today. So it helps other people with their onboarding because I'm like, I've already tried that. It doesn't work. And as a result, I'm also able to kind of look ahead a little bit more too and see what that next thing that we could be doing
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like innovating the sales process. I think like sometimes we think of like products and engineering and things like that as being innovative, but I think it's really important to take the mindset of being innovative with your approach to sales too. So I was prospecting myself and closing deals myself all while I was looking for those first members of my team. And we quickly found my first couple of SDRs. And then in 2019, we really grew all of the teams out. And in 2020, I only see that growing, even more. So it's been a super, super exciting ride so far.
That's exciting, man. Yeah, I mean, I can't believe it's already been 2 years. I feel like it was just yesterday when you first made that jump. So congratulations thus far, man. But I'd love to take a couple steps back here. Just taking a look at your LinkedIn page, I see that you were in quite a bit of different stuff before you kind of made the jump into tech sales. Do you mind just sharing a little bit more about like your experiences? I see here, for example, like you interned at the U.S. Senate in D.C., doing some organizing work for Obama. I guess, do you mind just touching upon like some of your previous experiences and I guess how that led to you taking the leap into tech sales?
Yeah. So in in high school, I was really active in like business groups, and when I was, I think I was around 15 years old. Um, in my profile, I always kind of mention how my first sort of coaching job was as a karate instructor. And one of my students' parents was a business professor, and I was like super involved in business groups. And he basically helped me with this like project I was working on. And when I was like 15, he would let me sit in on like some graduate level classes, and it just like totally got me interested in business. And then I like somehow when I got to college, I got like really interested in like politics. And I always kind of went back and forth between the two. Ended up majoring in political science. And I think what really piqued it is I really enjoyed like leadership. I really enjoyed like coming up with a vision and bringing things into action. So literally my first and second week on college campus, I like start running for student government, like senator position. And then after that, I ran for, in the same year as a freshman in college, I ran for student body president. And nobody thinks that like a freshman is going to win. Like it's usually always seniors. And I ended up winning.
Nice.
With a student body of, we had like 16,000 students at the time. So a pretty big campus. And that really that leadership track that I was on really kind of fueled my interest in politics. And so I got involved in like everything I possibly could on campus. And I found like politics to be a really good like conduit for that. And then I ended up networking my way into interning on the Hill for one of our U.S. senators in North Carolina, in my home state. And so when I was involved in student government, that sort of paved the way for that opportunity there. And after college, I ended up running a statewide political campaign. And the segue between sales and politics was I was running a statewide political campaign, and I walked out of the room. And typically in politics, like the candidate themselves can outraise like their staff pretty easily by basically cold calling. And I kind of came out of the room, and the candidate came out of the room, and I had raised like a ton of money. And then I was able to do that really repeatedly. And then a friend sort of recommended that I try out tech sales when I was, in my early 20s. And I ended up doing it and being very, very good at it. And at first I didn't like love it because I still wanted that like leadership aspect of it. And I quickly got into like sales management. And then I was like, okay, this leadership thing is what was missing. And now I have that back. And so that sort of brought me back to life again after being an SDR for like 8 months. And the context was the company I worked for at the time had a work abroad program in South America, and the team was not hitting their goals in terms of like revenue. And when I intercepted the team, they weren't doing well, and really quickly we turned it around. And then I basically have stayed in management for the most part ever since then. But that's a little bit about my background.
That's awesome, man. So you were cold calling for political campaigns before you were even an SDR.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of rejections, or like would you say like that would be even a tougher job than maybe like an SDR job like at Snack Nation or ChiliPiper, simply because I don't know, what are your thoughts?
For me, that was certainly tougher because there are so many moving pieces going on in a political campaign. And for that particular race, we weren't extremely well resourced as like some other campaigns that might have like a ton of outside help. So for this particular campaign, it didn't have a lot of resources. So you're juggling like scheduling, and you're having to be in multiple places while you're fundraising. Plus you're coming up with like policy platforms and trying to get endorsements. And there's an expiration date. That was the worst thing, is that you have a primary and a general election, and you're always against this like timeline. In sales, like your timeline is your like funding or like your ability to keep the lights on, which is usually a little bit longer than like the finite date of a political campaign. So as a result, I was like, okay, like I can have time to like literally like breathe and actually like try to learn. Whereas like just being swept up in a political campaign is it was a very difficult environment to learn in when you're against that tight of a deadline. And so you're just like executing like the best that you can, especially with the formal training. And we ended up doing like a really, really good job, and had many people trying to get me to interview, and as like a finance director, campaign manager, and other places. But the uncertainty of always looking for a job was not appealing to me, and managing a million things at once in politics. And I'm really happy with my decision to stay in tech sales.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe one day you can like just go back and provide some consulting sales services for these campaigns, man, down the line.
Yeah, some of them need it, that's for sure.
That's awesome, man. Appreciate that overview. I'd love to just like fast forward a bit. Like ChiliPiper, obviously, one thing that really stands out to me about the company is it's 100% remote. And both you and I are from LA, and we're very familiar with the lovely 405 and the traffic there. I'd love to hear more about like just the remote culture, man. Like any pros, like any cons, if you could think any. I'd love for you just to paint a picture of just, you know, a day in the life of a 100% remote company like ChiliPiper.
Yeah, so initially I was one of the naysayers who I'm now trying to convince that remote working is a good idea for some people. I don't necessarily think it's a fit for everyone, but
Yeah.
for us, it seems to work really well based on the sort of model that we've created and the type of people that we look for and things like that. For me, remote work has been a game changer. Like not having a commute and being able to work. It doesn't mean that I don't go to the office. Like I'm in an office right now. I'm usually at the office. It doesn't mean that. I think like some people think like when they hear, oh, you're scaling a remote team, your SDRs are like doing laundry and watching football at home all day. And I'm like, no, that's not what my team does. And that's not what I do all day either. Like the opposite ends up true. Like there's actually like a lot of scientific studies based on this. I was just reading a pretty intense one the other day that they were doing in Europe. And the conclusion of the study was that people were working a lot more being remote work. Because, you know, in my personal experience, it makes sense because you have blurred lines between like what is work and what is home. So that really reinforces me to go to my co-working space so that I can, you know, still be able to separate a little bit. Even though I tend to try to look at life pretty holistically, at least I'm able to like stop working on our project and like relax a little bit. But for me, it has been a game changer in an absolutely like positive way. I'm much more productive. My team is much more productive. It's really forced me to be a better communicator because I really have to be able to articulate exactly what I mean and why, and focus on like causal relationships in sales instead of just like gut check methodologies that I feel like is really easy to go by. And so it actually has had the opposite effect of like coaching and training of my team. I spend more time with them on an individual basis than I would have before. We don't really have like what I call like water cooler like chat what companies, you know, you're like in
Yeah.
the kitchen when you're in an office and you're like
Like
distracted
small
for 20
talk.
minutes. Yeah, exactly. We don't really have that. Our meetings are like literally like, what do you need to talk about? And then you hit end on Zoom and it's over. Like it's not this like, oh, like, you know, somebody's still over here and you're like waiting on people and I don't know. So
Mm.
that I found that the meetings are much more efficient. The people are much more efficient. I have to be more focused with my like language, but also like the things outside of work, like, you know, I'm able to like, I read more and meditate more. I spend more time with like loved ones. I work out more, like all these other things, like benefits of like time that I've gotten back in my day because I have an 8-minute walk home that I, you know, used to be stuck in traffic for an hour before. Um, you know, aside from just the commute, I think it's, you know, we focus on freedom. And then with the freedom comes like results, like we're very results oriented. And then the sort of trade-off there is we provide a world-class level of training that we can guarantee that you won't get anywhere else. And so I have customized training programs with an hour one-on-one coaching with every person on my team on like a weekly basis, plus weekly, you know, ongoing trainings from there. So I think a lot of things have gotten better with both the business and like my personal life and professional life having like worked remotely.
Hmm. Hmm. I guess like what would you say to a company that says like absolutely no remote work, like it's inefficient, our employees will slack off, it's this, you know, coming into the office is like the most traditional way of doing work. Like, do you have like any thoughts for those companies? And furthermore, like, do you think remote work will start to become more common within SaaS companies in the future, or do you think it really just depends on whoever's at the top of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, I encounter leaders like that a lot, and like I always say, well, like it's working. So their argument is always that it won't work, and I'm like, I can literally show you my Salesforce reports, like that it's working for the team. Like we've scaled very quickly. You know, the year-over-year revenues, the headcount growth, the bootstrapped approach instead of many other things that can go wrong in office. It's less expensive, and usually the argument that I hear is that you can't do it remotely, and I'm like, well, we're doing it remotely. And then when I dig a little bit deeper, it's usually because of some sort of fear, and the fear is that it could work. And then there's all these assumptions that we like made about what it means to work, and then you start having to like make all these like it's complicated because then you have to it requires more thought. And when you've always done something a certain way, it's easier to just like keep the status quo. Like that's like half the battle in sales. It's like when a deal is closed lost, like half the reason why is because of status quo. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's much easier to go to our default, and they're doing the same thing. And what I'm noticing is like when people leave more expensive cities, or they have they need satellite offices or things like that. I'm noticing a trend also that they're also allowing people to work, remotely in lieu of like rising costs in certain cities,
Mm-hmm.
even like San Francisco. I hear every week of new companies allowing their employees to work remotely. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I usually get a lot of, people I talk to that are pretty, strong feelings one way or another, and I used to be one of those people. But once I learned that like this, it is possible to do it, um, then you become more open to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome, man. Just always like to hear your insight, especially being at a remote company for a couple of years now, and how that's worked out for you guys, and really appreciate that. But yeah, I'd love to transition to more like, obviously, like your LinkedIn, most of your LinkedIn content is always about just coaching and developing your team. Do you mind just sharing a little bit more about just like you mentioned, ChiliPiper seems to have like a really great training and development program, even for like a completely remote company. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so we take on coaching and training. Like I said, we do it weekly and also one-on-one, every single week with everyone in the company. And we start with customized plans that are specific to that person. But then for the entire company, one of the things that we've done in the past year is we've developed call scoring. And I gave a talk on this back in August, and I asked the room, like, how many people score your calls? I think a lot of people aren't listening to their calls, or their calls recordings. That is a little bit scarier to me than not scoring them at all. Like, you have to be able to listen in order to be able to score. So I don't know how I would be able to come up with customized training plans for people if I didn't know what they were doing, or what was happening on the phones at least. And so there's a certain awareness there that I think you have to create in terms of like between like leadership and front lines, and then what's actually happening on the phone. And the reason for that is I learn just as much as like the team does, of what is working and what isn't. If there's one thing I've learned about sales, is that it's like super dynamic and changes all the time. And the best leaders I know are the ones that are really in tune with their teams, and also have an ear to like what's going on the front lines, whether it's email replies or the calls as well. And so I always try to be like one of those people, like, I can always, reply to an email or hop on a call like myself and actually help someone on my team. And so that's kind of the approach I take. So what we did was we listened to our calls pretty regularly, and then we came up with the idea to create small categories to then score them off of. And so every time we listen to calls, we score them, and I have my team, we listen to a call together, we have the team member play the call, they give feedback on what they did well, and then room for improvement. And then the whole team gives the feedback. Maybe like I'll pick on like one or two people, two or three people, and then I'll sort of end that exercise with doing it myself. saying what they
Nice.
did well, and then room for improvement. And there's usually like one big point that I want to hit home there. And I'll kind of use that as an opportunity for everyone, because if one person is having that issue, chances are everyone has ran against that issue. And if you can use that opportunity to really train everyone on that, they remember it and they start doing it on the phones. And then what you see is they gradually get better at that one micro skill. And then you move on to the next micro skill after you've reinforced it enough times and people are starting to do it. And eventually you start building these micro skills, and over time, like, your sales team is really like either turned a corner in revenue, or they're exceeding their current goals in revenue. And we saw that here at ChiliPiper multiple times, with the emphasis that we have placed on training. So that's one quick example. Another one we do is we bring in a lot of outside content to amplify what we're doing on this like call coaching basis, but we don't keep it theoretical or philosophical. We go over the content and say a book. So we recently did Never Split the Difference as one of many examples that we've done. It's a great book for any type of salesperson. But I think sometimes when we go through trainings, we can miss the applicability. We forget that we still need the knowledge to turn into application. And so what we do is we do like role plays. We show like good examples, or examples where it could have maybe been done better. And so we connect concepts that we're learning to what we're actually doing. And then the key is to then reinforce it. So the team will then, being that we're remote, will share these things together on Slack. And then it's almost like I don't even need to be there, because they're mutually reinforcing to one another the concepts that we did in training. And it's this like organic culture of growth that like I've always wanted as a sales leader. And then in the future, we'll go over like another topic, and we'll just keep doing that over and over and over again with different outside topics that we bring in. And it's just been so valuable. And I have, within the past week, I had 2 reps tell me that it was the best training that they've ever gotten in the world was at ChiliPiper. And that just sort of means all the world to me.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, I could definitely sense your passion for just really wanting to develop your reps and make them, or making sure that they're the best equipped for the job, which is super exciting, man. I guess like on the contrary, like why do you feel like coaching at certain sales organization is sometimes overlooked and maybe not as much of a high priority? And what do you kind of have as far as just like thoughts around just certain sales organizations that don't really tend to, put as many resources into their reps or their SDRs, maybe as much as like ChiliPiper really likes to emphasize on?
Yeah, I don't think it's as much as a will issue as it is like you don't know what you don't know. And I think a lot of times what happens is, very traditionally, like top performers, this is a very sort of blanket statement I'm using, but in many examples, I see a lot of top performers getting promoted into like leadership roles. And not to say that there aren't other types of reps that get promoted, but very frequently that's the model. And when they get promoted into a leadership role, very frequently someone does how they did things, and then they try to impart that on other people. And usually how they did things is basically on what their manager taught them. And so we get in this process of like, okay, I'm going to teach you all the things that I would do, which isn't necessarily a bad approach, but there's more efficient ways to do it, to drive results across like teams of people. And so I think sometimes like the most common thing I see is like reactionary, like instead of like, okay, this is what I'm going to teach you, and these are the things that I'm going to outline, and this is the sort of stake I'm going to put in the ground. A lot of times what I see is like reactionary management, where like something comes up, oh gosh, it's just a problem, and the problem gets like bigger, instead of using like coaching and training as a preemptive tool to solve a problem. So I spend most of my time not going over activity, not going over like email metrics, not going over like the things that we need to be doing. I more so like literally show people how to do it, and I focus on how they can be better at their roles, instead of just like always managing to numbers or spreadsheets or talk time or call count or things like that. Like it's really easy to do those things. And I definitely have done it as a manager, but now I spend a lot more time on the development through my own trial and error as a leader. And it's been so much more fruitful. So those are my thoughts on that.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate that. No, we're coming close to our time here in about 6 minutes or so, but just have a couple questions around just like, what do you kind of look for in an SDR at ChiliPiper?
Yeah, so we really look a lot of times when people interview for SDR roles, it's usually an entry level role to that company, whether it's in that person's career or not, but to that company and sort of the entry level role. And so a lot of times, what I've seen in the past is interview models are maybe a little bit, one time I heard somebody ask, I often hear people ask SDR candidates to like go through something that they're passionate about and kind of demonstrate that through the process. We take a little bit of a different approach. We try to be empirical with our hiring process. And so we have several different tests that we run throughout our hiring process to basically determine how coachable an SDR is, and then also their knowledge in the sales space. Usually one of the things that I look for there is like someone's ability to uncover like some sort of need, problem, or something about the prospect that then serves like a reason for your engagement with them. Most people just like go in and start pitching their product, and that's what I don't want to see. I don't want to see like somebody going in and then like immediately pitching. So having some sort of like compelling reason. And then the last component there is technical acumen, because it is a little bit of a technical product. So someone who is kind of fluent in the sales tech, marketing tech space, and can kind of maneuver about that pretty easily. So the three things that I would narrow it down to is coachability, sales acumen, and tech acumen.
That's awesome, man. Appreciate that. And just my last question, I always like to ask this. Just always love hearing people's thoughts. But let's just say, there's someone who just listened to this podcast. They're like, wow, ChiliPiper sounds awesome. Michael sounds awesome. They're pumped by your just inspiration there. And they maybe were on the fence about applying for an SDR job. But, after watching this podcast with you, they're pumped. What advice do you have for someone that, is potentially considering a career as an SDR, maybe at ChiliPiper or just anywhere in general?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of the rewards of being an SDR, like SDRs have usually aren't able to see like right away. But the thing is like having been an SDR myself and having trained like hundreds of SDRs, it's incredibly rewarding because of the grit and tenacity that you learn, but also the fundamental like understanding of like what makes people tick and how to build like business cases. And those things like never change, whether you're trying to figure out how to, go to market with a product, or whether you're cross-selling and upselling as an account manager, or whether you go down the more frequent path of like SDR manager or account executive. All of these different roles are dependent upon building like business cases. And there's no harder job than like opening the top of the funnel of what an SDR has to do, and how much grit goes into that. Some of the best like recruiters that I've ever seen have been like SDR, like managers and SDRs, like some of the best, SDR, or excuse me, some of the best like sales leaders I've seen have been SDRs themselves, so they know what it's like to be in the trenches. I trained one of my SDRs how to cross sell and upsell, and then like every month he's like on the account manager leaderboard,
Nice.
Farming the best. So I think that it's such a great segue to the role. But I think sometimes we get in the role, we want to kind of escape it really quickly, and it's like a trend that I see really quickly. And so the thing that I would say is like learn all the lessons that you can in the role and really enjoy it while you're there. So that's what I would leave people with.
Absolutely. Mike, I see that we're coming close to our time here. If there's any place anyone can reach you or just get in touch with you, where's the best way to get a hold of you?
I'm really active on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out to me there. That's the quickest and fastest way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for being a great guest, man. Really appreciate all your wisdom and advice here. I'm definitely going to be sharing more of your content and super glad we're able to connect, man. But thank you so much for your time and for being a great guest.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Of course, Sales Dev Squad, we'll catch you guys on the next one.